"Please don't," she cried in terror. The rancher looked on and stood frozen in horror. The twin suns of Elisara 7 stretched their light over the wide, golden plains. Dust danced lazily in the warm breeze, catching the light and scattering it across the endless ranchlands. The air smelled faintly of dry grass, minerals, and the metallic tang of machinery. It was the kind of day that could make a man forget the dangers lurking just beyond the horizon, but danger was always close in the frontier. Elias Corbin adjusted his hat against the glare, squinting as he walked along the fence line. His boots sank into the soft, sandy soil with a muted crunch. Livestock grazed calmly, their pale hides gleaming under the twin suns. It was the largest herd on the western ridge of the colony, and it had been his pride for years. Every animal had a name, or at least a memory. Each one told a story of survival, growth, and human care in a world that could be indifferent at best and deadly at worst. Elias moved slowly, inspecting the fence. The last storm had weakened several posts, and the automated repairs hadn't held. He knew he would need to reinforce the sections before nightfall. But his attention was drawn to the far horizon, where the flat plains met jagged rock formations. There was a shimmer, an unusual glint in the air, moving with an unnatural rhythm. He frowned. "Just heat waves," he muttered to himself. His voice sounded strange, even in the open air, like a human claim of comfort against unseen threats. He returned his attention to a calf that was tangled in a low fence wire. Kneeling, he gently untangled it, murmuring soft words. The calf responded with a nudge and a soft lowing, trusting him. That trust, Elias knew, was rare in the wilds of Elisara 7. Most creatures here either fled danger or fled humans, but some animals had learned to survive beside humans. That bond, the bond between human and animal, was something that made life here bearable, even when the stars themselves seemed indifferent. And then came the scream. It tore through the quiet like a blade through cloth. High, desperate shaking and filled with something far worse than fear, it was pure, raw terror. Elias' heart stopped for a moment. He looked up, scanning the horizon where the sound had come from. "Please do." The words were barely human, almost choked, repeated in frantic gasps. A figure came running across the plains, arms flailing, hair streaming behind her. Her face was pale, her eyes wide, and her entire body shook as if the air itself had threatened to crush her. It was Lyra, a young colonist who had arrived only a few cycles ago. She was small, slight, not built for the harshness of the frontier. And yet here she was, running straight into the heart of danger, or something worse. Elias froze. He had trained himself to respond quickly, to make decisions in the heat of unexpected chaos. Yet something in Lyra's scream, in the sheer horror in her eyes, made his body lock, as if gravity itself had grown heavy. The plain stretched endlessly around him, but there was something wrong, something he could not name. "Lyra, stop!" he called, voice booming across the fields. But she didn't hear. She kept running, feet pounding the sandy soil, heading straight toward him. And then he saw it. At first it was only a shimmer, a distortion in the air. But the shimmer coalesced into shapes, strange, formless figures that hovered above the herd. They weren't animals, nor machines, nor anything he had ever encountered. They moved with an intelligence that chilled him, shifting in ways that defied natural laws. Each movement seemed calculated, precise, and deliberate. The livestock froze. Calves and adult animals alike stared upward, unblinking, some taking a step back, others collapsing in confusion. The air felt heavier, charged, as if invisible hands were pressing down on every living thing in sight. "Stay back!" Elias shouted, waving his arms. "Get behind me!" Lyra stumbled to a halt behind him, gasping, tears streaming down her face. They're watching us," she whispered, voice trembling so much that Elias had to strain to hear her. Elias' mind raced. He had faced wild predators, storms, malfunctioning machines, and hostile terrain, but this was different. These shapes, these beings, were not mere threats of instinct or hunger. They were observing, calculating, judging. He noticed the light reflecting off them, not merely reflecting the sun's but bending strangely, as if the very air around them obeyed a new set of rules. Even from a distance, Elias could feel the weight of their attention pressing down on him. "Elias, what do we do?" Lyra's voice was trembling again, barely audible over the low hum that seemed to emanate from the figures themselves. He took a deep breath, forcing calm into his voice. "We watch, we wait, we don't panic." But inside, fear clawed at him. Humans were clever, yes. Humans were resilient, but even resilience had limits. And Elias had a gut feeling that these beings weren't limited. They were something else entirely. Then the first figure moved closer. The shimmer became more solid, more defined, and Elias could make out vague contours of what might have been limbs, but not in a way that obeyed any known anatomy. Its eyes, if they could be called that, seemed to pierce directly into his mind. A wave of vertigo washed over him as if the air itself had thickened. Lyra cried out and tried to run again, but Elias grabbed her shoulder. "No, don't move." She froze, shaking against him. Elias felt a surge of protectiveness. It was instinctive, human. This wasn't just about survival, it was about defending another life. The creature tilted, almost curiously, and a pulse of energy rippled through the air. Animals let out low, confused noises, some backing away, others standing rigid. Elias held his ground. His mind raced, cataloging every movement, every sound, every anomaly. Humans were unpredictable, and maybe that was their only advantage. A sudden thought struck him. They're not just attacking, they're studying. His voice was low, steady. "Lyra, stay calm, don't scream. Don't run, watch me, follow my lead." She nodded weakly, clutching his arm like a lifeline. Elias raised a hand, pointing toward the herd. "Move slowly, herd them toward the canyon ridge. Keep your eyes on me. Do exactly as I say." Lyra nodded again. They began moving, carefully, inch by inch, her small hands gripping the rope he had tossed her earlier to keep the younger livestock together. Every step was measured, deliberate. The beings followed, silent and deliberate. Elias realized that any sudden movement could trigger a response, but hesitation, intelligence, and careful action might confuse them. The sun dipped lower, casting long shadows across the plains. Dust rose around them with each careful step. The figures moved with uncanny precision, anticipating, yet not fully predicting their actions. It was the first human instinct, improvisation in the face of unknown danger, that seemed to throw them off. Elias thought of the stories his grandfather had told him, stories of humans surviving impossible odds, outsmarting beasts far larger and stronger than themselves. Stories of cleverness, courage, and teamwork. He realized now that those were not just tales. They were lessons. Humanity had endured because it could adapt, think, and act beyond what other species could anticipate. And in that moment he felt a spark of hope. "Almost there," he whispered. They moved closer to the canyon, the natural rock formations providing some shelter, some leverage. He could see the faint path that cut between the cliffs, narrow, twisting, but strong enough to hide part of the herd. The beings paused at the canyon's edge, as if uncertain. Elias' heart pounded in his chest. He didn't know what would happen next, but he knew one thing: humans were not prey. Not now. Not ever. And as the first figure hovered over the cliff's edge, tilting curiously toward the herd, Elias steadied his breath. Whatever came next, they would face it together, human ingenuity and courage standing against the unknown. The plains were quiet again, but only for a heartbeat. The twin suns were setting, painting the sky in blood red and gold, and Elias knew that this frontier, this quiet, unforgiving world, was about to become a proving ground for something far greater than survival. He glanced at Lyra, still trembling, still afraid. But there was a spark of something else in her eyes: hope. And hope, Elias knew, was what made humans dangerous. Elias and Lyra huddled behind the jagged rocks of the canyon ridge. The herd, though frightened, was slowly moving into the narrow path Elias had chosen. The twin suns dipped lower, casting long, jagged shadows across the plain. Every sound, the low wind, the soft shuffling of hooves, the faint buzzing in the air, felt amplified. Elias' heart thudded, his eyes never leaving the horizon. There, just beyond the herd, the shapes hovered, almost floating, their edges shimmering with a strange, liquid light. They didn't walk or crawl. They moved in ways that defied physics, twisting and expanding as if the air itself was bending around them. They're watching," Lyra whispered, gripping his arm so tightly her knuckles were white. Elias nodded slowly. "I know, and they're not like anything we've faced before." For a moment, neither of them moved. The canyon walls protected them, but they offered no real safety. From this distance, the figures could still see them. The shimmering forms tilted, twisting in ways that seemed almost intelligent. And then Elias realized something that made his stomach tighten. They were not just observing, they were analyzing. One of the shapes drifted closer to a young calf. The animal froze, eyes wide, and the creature hovered above it, almost as if inspecting its every breath. Then, in a movement too fast for the eye to follow, the calf collapsed, paralyzed yet alive. Elias' stomach lurched. He wanted to run, to scream, but his legs stayed rooted to the ground. He knew panic would be fatal. They're not killing it," Lyra said softly, her voice trembling. They're doing something else." Elias studied the creature carefully. Its edges rippled, glowing faintly, and Elias thought he saw a pattern, a rhythm, a pulse that suggested calculation rather than instinct. This wasn't a predator feeding on prey. This was something else, something intelligent. "Step slowly," Elias whispered. "We move toward the herd. Don't make sudden movements. Watch me." They inched forward, the narrow canyon path guiding the frightened animals. Each step was careful, deliberate. The creatures followed, their movements smooth and deliberate, yet not perfectly predictable. Elias realized that they were trying to anticipate human behavior, and that unpredictability might be their only advantage. A low hum filled the air, vibrating through the ground and bones alike. Lyra covered her ears, her eyes wide. Elias kept his hand on her shoulder, forcing her to stay still. The hum seemed to come from the shapes themselves, as if they were communicating silently or scanning the humans in some way beyond sight or sound. "They're testing us," Elias said, almost to himself. "I don't know why, but they're testing." Lyra shook her head, tears running down her face. "Why us? We're just people. They could pick anyone." Elias felt a surge of protectiveness. "That's exactly why. They don't understand us yet. And that might be our advantage." He glanced at the herd. The animals were frozen in fear, but Elias had a plan. He grabbed a small flare from his belt and ignited it, waving it slowly toward the creatures. Their movements paused, tilted, as if the sudden light had startled them. The clever part was not just the flare, it was the timing and unpredictability. The creatures weren't used to thinking in human ways. They expected instinctive reactions, but not calculated courage. Lyra gasped. You can't fight them," Elias shook his head. "I'm not fighting, I'm confusing them. Watch." He lit a second flare and tossed it to the side, then moved slowly with the herd toward a rock outcropping. The creatures tilted, following the lights, but their form shifted oddly, almost as if they weren't built for rapid change in their environment. Their glowing edges flickered. For a moment, Elias felt hope. These beings, as alien and terrifying as they were, did not fully understand humans. The unpredictability, the courage, the intelligence, these were qualities that gave humanity an edge no other species seemed to possess. He glanced at Lyra. "Ready." She nodded, trembling but obedient. Elias counted to 3 in his head. On his signal, she ran ahead, carefully herding a portion of the livestock down the narrow canyon path. The creatures tilted, their shimmer intensifying, as if surprised by the movement. They adjusted, but slowly, calculating. Elias seized the moment and guided another section of the herd in the opposite direction. By splitting the herd, he forced the creatures to divide their attention. He could see them hesitate, hover back and forth, unsure which group to prioritize. There, they don't know what to do, Lyra whispered, awe and fear mixing in her voice. They've never seen humans like this. Elia's heart swelled with a mix of pride and relief. It was true. Humans were unpredictable in ways no alien species could fully calculate. Fear alone could not dominate them. Strategy, courage, and improvisation made humans dangerous. The creatures pulsed and shimmered, then advanced again, slowly this time, carefully, almost experimentally. Elias realized they were not just observing, they were learning. Every movement humans made, every decision was being catalogued. "They're studying us," Elias muttered. "Not hunting, learning." The realization brought both fear and determination. If the creatures were learning, then they could adapt, but humans could too. Humans had survived countless worlds, countless dangers through innovation, courage, and cooperation. Elias thought quickly. "We need a trap, not to hurt them, but to confuse them." Lyra looked at him, puzzled. A trap." "Yes," Elias said firmly. "We'll use the canyon. Their movements are precise, but they're not used to obstacles or reflections. We can turn their intelligence against them." He began arranging rocks and flares along the canyon's narrowest points, guiding the herd slowly. The creatures followed, observing, seemingly aware of every step, but their form and structure limited their reactions. They were powerful, yes, but not human. Suddenly, one of the creatures emitted a pulse of energy. It struck the ground near Elias, sending a tremor through the soil. The herd panicked, scattering slightly. Lyra cried out and Elias' heart skipped. But he held firm, waving the flare, calming the animals and guiding them along the path. "This is it," Elias whispered. "Stay close. Don't panic. Follow me." The creatures adjusted, but slowly. Their movements were elegant, almost beautiful in a terrifying way. Yet, for all their grace, they were predictable to someone who understood instinct and courage. Elias had seen enough of the frontier to know one thing. Survival depended not on strength alone, but on quick thinking, adaptation, and moral resolve. And humans had all three. As the sun dipped fully behind the western ridge, the shadows stretched across the canyon floor. The creatures hovered above, unsure, shimmering with alien energy. Elias and Lyra guided the last of the herd into a small side crevice, hidden from direct observation. The creatures paused, then slowly moved past, almost curious, almost cautious. Elias' legs shook with relief, but he forced himself to stand tall. Lyra clung to him, trembling but safe. They didn't follow us," she whispered. "No," Elias said, scanning the horizon. "But they're not gone. They're learning, they're watching, and we've just shown them humans aren't easy." Lyra looked at him with awe. "Humans, we're special." Elias smiled faintly, exhausted but proud. "We are, not because we're stronger or faster or bigger, but because we think, we adapt, we care. We don't just survive, we fight in ways that no one expects." For the first time since the morning, Elias allowed himself to breathe. The creatures were still out there, watching from a distance, shimmering faintly in the twilight. But he knew something important: humanity had survived. And more than that, humanity had shown courage and intelligence beyond what the cosmos expected. Lyra shivered but smiled weakly. I think we can survive this, together." Elias nodded. "Together, always together." He looked out over the plains one last time before darkness fell. The stars began to appear, distant and cold, but beautiful. And in that cold vastness, Elias knew one undeniable truth. The frontier was dangerous, yes, but humans, unpredictable, brave, and clever, were something the universe would have to reckon with. The quiet hum of the alien forms faded slightly as they hovered beyond the ridge, curious and cautious. Elias felt both fear and respect. They were formidable, yes, but humans. Humans were remarkable. And this realization gave him a spark of hope that burned brighter than any flare. Tonight, The ranch would be safe. Tomorrow, the fight would continue. But Elias knew this. Humans would never be prey again, not while they had courage, intelligence, and the will to survive. Night had fully fallen over the plains of Elisara 7. The twin suns were gone, replaced by a cold, starry sky that stretched endlessly over the horizon. The wind carried a faint chill, rustling the dry grass and whispering through the jagged rocks of the canyon. Elias and Lyra crouched behind a large boulder, the rest of the herd huddled in the shadows nearby. Their hearts still raced from the encounter earlier in the day. The alien shapes had retreated, hovering silently beyond the ridge, but their presence was still felt, an electric tension that hummed in the air. "They're out there," Elias whispered, voice low, steady. "Watching, waiting." Lyra's hands shook. They might come back." Elias nodded. "They will, but we have a choice. We can run or we can fight, not with strength, not with weapons, but with our minds, with courage." The young colonist swallowed hard, trying to steady her trembling. "Fight them?" "Yes," Elias said firmly. "They think they understand humans. They've studied us, observed us, but they haven't seen everything humans can do." He glanced over the herd. The animals were restless, but they trusted him. That trust was more than instinct. It was a reflection of human patience, intelligence, and care. If the aliens wanted to learn about humans, they were about to get a lesson they would not forget. Elias moved carefully, checking the terrain. The canyon offered natural advantages, narrow passages, high walls, and sharp turns that could confuse the aliens' movements. He turned to Lyra. "We'll use this canyon. Their form is strange, yes, but they're not used to obstacles or unpredictable paths. They calculate everything, but humans improvise." Lyra's eyes widened. "You mean a trap?" "Yes, not to hurt them, just to confuse them, delay them, and show them that humans are dangerous." Elias' voice had a sharp edge, filled with determination. He began arranging rocks along the canyon path, stacking them carefully to create narrow choke points. He placed small mirrors he had salvaged from old equipment, angled to reflect light from flares. His plan was simple: use the aliens' own focus against them, turning observation into confusion. Lyra helped, though hesitantly at first. Elias guided her, teaching her how to place the rocks and mirrors without drawing attention. "We move slowly," he whispered. "Every step matters, every detail counts." As they worked, the shimmering shapes returned, gliding over the ridge above them. Their movements were smooth, elegant, almost hypnotic. They hovered silently, studying the humans below. The low hum in the air grew louder, vibrating through the canyon walls and the ground beneath their feet. Elias' jaw tightened. He could feel their attention, their curiosity, their calculations. But he also felt something else, their hesitation. His plan had begun to work. The creatures were powerful, yes, but the canyon introduced variables they had not fully anticipated. "Are they scared?" Lyra whispered. "No," Elias said quietly. "Not scared, confused. That's different. Confusion can make a predator hesitate." With the traps in place, Elias turned to the herd. "Ready?" he asked. Lyra nodded, eyes wide but resolute. Together, they began guiding the livestock along the narrow path, careful not to trigger the alien forms prematurely. The creatures hovered closer, curious, their shimmering edges bending the air strangely. Elias signaled with a flare, tossing it along the path. The light reflected off the mirrors, creating bursts of illumination that danced unpredictably across the canyon walls. The creatures hesitated, tilting in ways that suggested analysis and calculation. They had not expected such sudden, chaotic movements. "Now!" Elias shouted, and both he and Lyra began moving more aggressively, guiding the herd deeper into the canyon's narrow twists. The creatures tried to follow, their forms pulsating with energy. But the mirrors and the rocks forced them to navigate in ways that slowed them down, their smooth, calculated movements disrupted by human unpredictability. One of the creatures emitted a pulse of energy, striking a rock near Elias. The ground shook and dust fell from the canyon walls. Lyra cried out, but Elias held her close, guiding her to safety. "Keep going," he shouted. "Don't panic." The herd moved like a flowing river, twisting through the canyon. The aliens followed, but their movements were jerky now, uncertain. The rocks and mirrors reflected light in ways they couldn't fully anticipate. Elias realized that humans had turned their intelligence into a weapon. Lyra's confidence grew. She shouted directions to the animals, guiding them with a strength she didn't know she possessed. Together, she and Elias moved with the herd, coordinating each step, each turn. The creatures paused at the canyon's narrowest point, their shimmering edges flickering. They seemed to communicate silently, pulsing in rhythm as if exchanging information. Elias watched closely. They were analyzing, learning, but slowly. Humans' improvisation was still something they could not fully predict. "Almost there," Elias whispered. "Just a little further." They guided the herd into a small side crevice, hidden from direct observation. The creatures hovered above, tilting, pulsating, and then paused. Elias felt a thrill of satisfaction. They had been forced to hesitate. The humans had gained the advantage. But Elias knew the night was far from over. The creatures were intelligent and adaptive. They would learn, eventually. Humans had only bought themselves time. He turned to Lyra. "We need to make them understand. We can't just survive. We have to show them humans are not easy prey." What do you mean?" she asked. "Action," Elias said simply. "We move next and we take the fight to them, not with weapons but with strategy, courage, and brains." Lyra looked at him, awe and fear mixing in her eyes. We can do that." "Yes," Elias said firmly. "Humans survive because we think, we adapt, and we care. We're not just animals in the wild. We're something more. And tonight we're going to prove it." He spent the next hours preparing. He used rocks, mirrors, and the natural layout of the canyon to create channels, obstacles, and false paths. The aliens, hovering above, observed carefully. Elias noticed patterns in their movements, slight hesitations, small overcorrections. He used these to plan every step of the coming engagement. When the first alien approached the narrowest channel, Elias signaled with a flare. The light reflected unpredictably across the mirrors, startling the creature. It hesitated, pulsing erratically. Elias moved the herd swiftly through the next turn. The second alien followed but misjudged the reflections. It collided with a rock, energy rippling outward, and Elias realized the first real victory had been won. The aliens were powerful, yes, but human ingenuity and courage could disrupt even their advanced calculations. Lyra shouted directions, guiding the animals through the canyon's twists. Elias kept flares ready, reflecting light in patterns designed to confuse the creatures further. Their movements became jerky, uncoordinated. The humans' unpredictable actions were forcing them to adapt, and they weren't fast enough. "Look at them," Elias whispered, breathless but exhilarated. "They don't know what to do, and that's our advantage." The aliens emitted a pulse, almost like a warning, but Elias pressed forward. The herd reached a small plateau, giving the humans higher ground. From here, they could observe and control the battlefield more effectively. Elias raised his hand. "This is it. Now we make them understand. Humans fight back, we survive, and we show them humans are dangerous." With careful precision, he manipulated the flares, mirrors, and rocks, creating a dazzling display of light, movement, and unpredictability. The creatures hesitated, pulsing rapidly, unable to calculate the humans' next actions. Lyra's confidence soared. She shouted directions, coordinated the animals, and even improvised new strategies on her own. Elias watched in pride. Humans were not just surviving, they were fighting back in ways no one expected. The creatures, for all their intelligence, began to retreat slightly. Their shimmering forms flickered, then stabilized, observing, learning, and perhaps beginning to respect the humans' ingenuity. Elias took a deep breath, realizing that tonight had been a turning point. Humans had survived, yes, but more than that, they had shown courage, strategy, and intelligence in the face of the unknown. The frontier was dangerous, but humans had proven they could not be underestimated. As the night deepened, the aliens slowly hovered back beyond the ridge. Their presence was still felt, but the immediate threat had passed. Elias and Lyra, exhausted but exhilarated, sat with the herd, watching the stars emerge in the clear Elisara 7 sky. "We did it," Lyra whispered, disbelief and relief mixing in her voice. "Yes," Elias said quietly, "but this is just the beginning. They've seen what humans can do. And now they will never forget." He looked out across the plains, feeling a mix of fear, pride, and determination. The frontier had tested them, yes, but humans had fought back, and humanity was far stronger than any alien calculation could predict. Tonight, they survived. Tomorrow, the fight would continue. But Elias knew this. Humans were not prey. Humans were dangerous. And the universe was about to realize it. The morning light spilled over the plains of Elisara 7, bathing the canyon in soft gold. Elias awoke with a jolt, his mind still replaying the events of the night. The alien shapes had retreated beyond the ridge, but their presence lingered in the air like a warning. Every rustle of grass, every distant cry of an animal reminded him that the battle was far from over. He stood, stretching stiff muscles, and looked at Lyra, who was already checking the herd. Her eyes were sharper now, alert, and her movements confident. The terror that had consumed her yesterday had given way to something stronger, determination. Humans could adapt quickly when forced, and Lyra was proof. "We need to prepare," Elias said quietly, more to himself than to Lyra. "They learned from last night, but so can we." Lyra glanced up, nodding. "What do you mean?" Elias pointed toward the narrow canyon path they had used. "We'll use their intelligence against them. They study patterns, movements, reactions. Last night, our unpredictability gave us the edge. Today, we turn it into a trap they cannot escape." The aliens had power, yes. Their forms shimmered with energy, capable of manipulating the environment in ways humans had never seen. But Elias had realized something critical. They were not invincible. They relied on observation, calculation, and control. Remove those advantages and they became uncertain. He began preparing. Using the natural layout of the canyon and plains, Elias set up channels and obstructions, carefully placing rocks, mirrors, and small flares. He created false paths to confuse the aliens, funnels to restrict their movement, and reflective surfaces to bend light unpredictably. Lyra followed his instructions, working quickly but carefully. "It's like a puzzle," she said, almost smiling. "Except the pieces move." "Exactly," Elias replied. "And we get to decide the rules." As the sun climbed higher, a low hum resonated across the plains. The alien forms had returned, hovering just beyond the ridge, studying the humans from a distance. They pulsed rhythmically, communicating in ways Elias couldn't fully comprehend, but he didn't need to understand them completely, he only needed to exploit their weaknesses. "They're waiting," Lyra whispered. "Watching." "Yes," Elias said, "but now we control the pace." Humans are unpredictable, and that's something they cannot fully calculate. With careful precision, they guided the herd through the canyon, moving slowly at first to draw the aliens closer. The shimmering forms followed, tilting and pulsing, observing every detail. Then, at the precise moment, Elias signaled with a flare. The reflected light bounced across the mirrors, creating a dazzling, chaotic display that disrupted the aliens' focus. They faltered. Elias seized the opportunity. He guided the herd into a narrow channel, forcing the aliens to follow in single file. The rocks and mirrors reflected light unpredictably, and the aliens' movements, once smooth and precise, became jerky and hesitant. Their energy pulses flickered as they adjusted to the unexpected obstacles. Lyra shouted instructions, guiding the animals through the maze-like canyon. Her confidence had grown tremendously. She was no longer the frightened colonist who had run blindly the day before. She was a strategist, thinking ahead, anticipating movements and improvising on the spot. One of the aliens emitted a sharp pulse, striking a rock and sending a tremor through the canyon. The ground shook, and dust rained down from the cliffs. Lyra cried out, but Elias held her close, forcing her to keep moving with the herd. "They're strong," she said, voice trembling, "but we're stronger in ways they don't understand." "Yes," Elias replied, "strength is not just muscle, it's courage, intelligence, adaptability. They may have power, but humans have more than that. We survive because we think." The aliens regrouped, pulsating rhythmically, seemingly communicating. Elias studied them carefully. Their shapes were flexible, intelligent, and precise, but predictable in their methods. They reacted to stimuli, calculated risks, and observed patterns. And humans, he realized, had something they could not anticipate: moral courage, creativity, and teamwork. He signaled to Lyra to split the herd into two groups, guiding one section through a hidden crevice. The aliens hesitated, unsure which path to follow. Their shimmering forms flickered with confusion. Humans had introduced variables they could not fully calculate. Elias' heart raced. This was the moment to strike, not with weapons but with strategy and human ingenuity. He lit another flare and tossed it into a narrow passage. The reflected light danced across mirrors, bouncing unpredictably along the canyon walls. The aliens tilted and pulsed, struggling to process the chaos. Their movements became jerky, uncoordinated, as the humans controlled the environment without touching them directly. Lyra's confidence soared. She guided the animals with precision, anticipating the aliens' reactions. "Move, move," she shouted, her voice strong, commanding. "Follow the path. Stay together." The aliens struggled, trying to follow both groups of humans. Their intelligence was great, but they were still limited by their reliance on observation and calculation. Human unpredictability disrupted their calculations. Every move Elias and Lyra made was carefully designed to exploit that weakness. A pulse of energy struck near Elias, sending a shockwave through the canyon. Dust and small rocks fell from the cliffs. He winced but did not falter, signaling to Lyra to move quickly. The herd navigated the obstacle, flowing like water through the narrow path. The aliens emitted low hums, communicating among themselves. Elias watched carefully, noting every hesitation, every overcorrection. They were learning, yes, but humans could adapt faster. Creativity, courage, and improvisation were advantages that no alien calculation could fully overcome. He guided the herd to the plateau above the canyon, giving them higher ground. From this vantage, they could observe the aliens' movements and control the battlefield. Elias raised his hand. "Now," he whispered, "we show them humans fight back." Using the mirrors and flares, he created a series of flashes, reflections, and movements designed to confuse and disorient. The aliens faltered, unsure how to proceed. Their pulses became erratic, their forms flickering as they tried to adapt to the chaos. Lyra shouted instructions, directing the herd with precision. She even improvised new strategies, guiding the animals in ways Elias hadn't planned. Humans were unpredictable, and that unpredictability was devastating to the aliens. The creatures began to retreat slightly, pulsing and flickering as they hovered above the canyon ridge. They were not defeated, but they were forced to acknowledge the humans' ingenuity and courage. Elias exhaled slowly, relief and pride washing over him. Humans had not just survived, they had fought back using intelligence, strategy, and moral courage. The aliens had been forced to adapt, hesitate, and retreat. Humanity had proven itself formidable, even against beings far more powerful and alien. "We did it," Lyra whispered, disbelief and triumph in her voice. "Yes," Elias said quietly, "but this is just the beginning. They've seen what humans can do, and now they will never underestimate us." The aliens hovered at a distance, observing silently. Their pulses flickered rhythmically, as if analyzing the humans' every action. Elias understood that this was only the first lesson. The frontier was dangerous, yes, but humans had shown they could adapt, think, and fight in ways no other species could anticipate. He looked at Lyra, who now stood confidently beside him. "Humans survive," he said, voice firm. "Humans fight back. And no matter what comes next, we will stand together." Lyra nodded, determination shining in her eyes. "Together," she agreed. As the sun rose higher, illuminating the plains, Elias knew the aliens would return, but he was no longer afraid. Humans had turned the tide, using courage, intelligence, and creativity to survive, and in doing so, had proven that humanity could challenge even the most advanced beings in the universe. Tonight, the battle had been won, not by strength alone, but by human ingenuity, adaptability, and moral courage. The frontier would continue to test them, but Elias knew one undeniable truth: humans were not prey. Humans were dangerous. And the universe was only beginning to understand it. The plains of Elisara 7 were quiet in the early morning light. The twin suns were rising, spilling pale gold across the canyon and the wide-open fields beyond. The air smelled of dust, dry grass, and the faint metallic tang of the colony machinery. The events of the past 2 days had left the humans exhausted, but also alive, and more importantly, wiser. Elias Corbin stood atop the plateau overlooking the canyon. The herd was calm now, grazing quietly, their trust in humans restored after the chaotic encounters with the alien shapes. He wiped sweat from his brow, though the cool morning breeze offered some relief. Lyra approached, her boots crunching softly on the rocky soil. Her face was still pale, but her eyes were sharp and alert. "They didn't come back last night," she said, glancing at the ridge where the aliens had hovered. "Do you think they're gone?" Elias shook his head slowly. "Gone? No, they're studying us, watching, learning. But they've seen what humans are capable of, and now they're hesitant." The hum that had accompanied the alien forms before was faintly present, like a memory in the air. It was subtle, almost comforting now, because Elias knew something. Humans were no longer the hunted. They were survivors, and more than that, they were fighters. He turned to Lyra. "It's time we make sure we're ready. They may come back, and when they do, we need to be prepared, not just to survive, but to show them humans are formidable." Lyra nodded. "How do we do that?" Elias smiled faintly. "By continuing what we started. We'll use the terrain, we'll use our intelligence, and most importantly, we'll use our courage." They spent the morning reinforcing the canyon, improving their traps and reflective setups. Rocks were carefully arranged, mirrors positioned to maximize unpredictability, and flares placed strategically to disorient any alien approach. But beyond the physical preparations, Elias spent time training Lyra in thinking ahead, observing patterns and making decisions under pressure. Humans' greatest strength, he reminded her, was their adaptability. By midday, the aliens returned. Their shimmering forms hovered above the ridge, pulsating in rhythm as if exchanging complex information. Elias watched carefully. They were intelligent, yes, but they were also cautious now, clearly aware that the humans below were not prey to be taken lightly. He whispered to Lyra, "Watch their movements, notice hesitation. They're learning from us, yes, but we can still teach them more." The humans began moving the herd again, carefully navigating the canyon. This time, however, they introduced deliberate misdirections. One group of livestock was guided along a false path, while Elias and Lyra used mirrors and flares to create optical illusions elsewhere. The aliens tilted and pulsed, their forms flickering as they tried to process the chaos. "This is incredible," Lyra whispered. We're confusing them." "Yes," Elias said, a note of pride in his voice. "And in doing so, we prove something important. Humans are unpredictable, clever, dangerous." The aliens emitted a pulse of energy, striking near one of the rocks and sending a tremor through the canyon floor. Elias braced himself, ensuring Lyra stayed safe. The herd, though startled, was guided with precision. Every step was calculated, every movement deliberate. The humans' coordination and courage were unmatched. Then came the first real moment of confrontation. One of the alien forms descended toward the narrowest point of the canyon, attempting to block the humans' path. Elias reacted instantly. He signaled with a flare, reflecting light unpredictably, forcing the creature to hesitate. Lyra guided the herd past the obstacle, her movements quick and precise. The alien pulsed, sending a wave of energy across the canyon. Rocks shifted, dust fell, and the humans were momentarily pressed back. But Elias and Lyra held their ground. The humans were resilient, refusing to yield even under overwhelming pressure. "It's working," Lyra shouted, her voice fierce with determination. "They can't predict us." "Yes," Elias said, "and that's exactly why we survive." The alien hesitated again, hovering above the canyon. Its pulsating shimmer flickered, almost like confusion. Elias realized that humans had achieved something remarkable. They had turned fear and uncertainty into a tactical advantage. The aliens had power, but humans had something they could not calculate: creativity, courage, and teamwork. Elias guided the herd into the plateau once more, giving them high ground. From there, they could observe and control the battlefield. He raised his hand, signaling for the next move. The flares and mirrors created a dazzling display of unpredictable light and motion. The aliens hesitated, pulsing rapidly as they tried to calculate the humans' intentions. Lyra shouted instructions, coordinating the animals and improvising new tactics. Humans were no longer reacting, they were initiating. Every move was designed to exploit the aliens' reliance on observation and calculation. Slowly, the aliens began to retreat. Not entirely, but enough to indicate a shift. They hovered near the canyon ridge, pulsing, observing, and perhaps beginning to understand the humans' capabilities. Elias felt a surge of pride. Humans had fought back, and they had done so not with brute force, but with intelligence, strategy, and courage. The day passed with cautious observation. The aliens remained at a distance, still studying, still learning. Elias and Lyra maintained the herd, making small adjustments to their defenses and tactics. They had proven something vital: humans were not easy prey. As the sun began to set, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold, Elias looked at Lyra. "We survived," he said quietly. "But more than that, we showed them humans are special. Humans are strong in ways they cannot measure." Lyra nodded, her eyes shining with determination. "We're remarkable," she whispered. "Yes," Elias agreed. "And now we prepare for whatever comes next. The frontier is never easy, but humans are ready." Night fell over Elisara 7, calm but charged with tension. The alien forms hovered at a distance, their pulses steady but cautious. They had not been defeated, but they had been forced to recognize the humans' ingenuity, adaptability, and courage. Humans had survived, and they had made an impression that would not be forgotten. Elias walked among the herd, checking the animals, ensuring everyone was safe. Lyra followed, her confidence growing with every step. They had faced the unknown and prevailed not by sheer strength, but by using the traits that made humans unique: intelligence, empathy, and bravery. As they rested that night, Elias looked up at the stars. The aliens were out there, watching, learning, and perhaps preparing for another attempt. But he was no longer afraid. Humans had survived impossible odds before, and they would do so again. He whispered to himself and to the young colonist beside him, "They will not forget us. And neither will we. Humans are strong, humans are clever, humans fight, and we never give up." Lyra smiled faintly, exhaustion and pride mingling on her face. "Together," she said. "Always together," Elias replied. The stars shone above, cold and distant, but the plains of Elisara 7 were alive with human courage and ingenuity. The aliens had tested them, but humans had proven themselves formidable. The frontier had been dangerous, yes, but humans had survived, fought back, and emerged victorious in their own way. And in the vast, silent expanse of the universe, Elias knew this truth would resonate far beyond Elisara 7. Humans were not to be underestimated. Humanity's spirit, creativity, and courage made them a force even the cosmos could not ignore. For tonight they rested. Tomorrow the frontier would bring new challenges. But humans would meet them head-on as they always had, with courage in their hearts and intelligence guiding their hands. The aliens had come to observe. Humans had fought back. And the story of the frontier, the story of humanity's courage, had only just begun.